I hadn't even finished unloading the last box when the knock came. It wasn't a friendly knock, the kind you expect from a new neighbor. It was sharp, rapid, and impatient, like a bill collector pounding on your door. Outside, I saw 3 people in matching polo shirts, clipboards in hand. Letters HOA gleamed on their name tags like a badge of authority. "Hello, we need to talk about the lake," the man in front announced. He didn't smile. In fact, his jaw looked like it was carved from concrete. Behind him, a woman peered over his shoulder, eyes narrowed and judgmental. I blinked, still gripping a box labeled kitchen stuff, completely caught off guard. "What about the lake?" I asked slowly, my voice careful and calm. They didn't hesitate. They barged right in like they owned the place. One of them actually brushed past me, scanning my living room like a cop. "We've had an issue with new owners not understanding the rules," the man said. "This lake is a shared community resource, and the docks fall under our purview." The way he said our purview made my skin crawl with irritation. I set the box down and faced them squarely, feeling my pulse quicken. "First of all, you don't just walk into someone's home uninvited," I said firmly. They exchanged looks, unfazed, like they'd done this 100 times before. "Second," I continued, "what exactly do you think belongs to you?" The woman sniffed, pulling a stapled packet from her clipboard with a flourish. "This," she said, thrusting the paper toward me with smug certainty. "According to Section 14 of the HOA bylaws, the lake is managed by us." I took the paper and skimmed it quickly, scanning for legal jargon and loopholes. The words sounded impressive, but nothing about them looked official or binding. "I'll review this," I said, folding the papers without another word. "Just so you understand." The man interrupted with a pointed glare. "Those docks are community property. People rely on them for lake access." Behind him, the other board member nodded like a bobblehead doll on a dashboard. I felt a flicker of amusement at their confidence. They really believed this story. "Sure," I said lightly. "I'll look into that and get back to you." That was the first time I saw his jaw tighten like a trap about to spring. "We'd appreciate your cooperation," he said, voice dripping with false politeness. "You're part of a community now. That means following the rules." I didn't bother to respond. I simply opened the door wider in silent dismissal. They left reluctantly, their matching sneakers squeaking on the hardwood floor. As soon as the door clicked shut, I exhaled a slow, measured breath. I had expected to deal with internet hookups and unpacking boxes today. Instead, I was dealing with self-appointed lake police and flimsy paperwork. I set the packet on the counter and stared at it like a bad omen. Something told me this wasn't. The last time I'd see those people, I picked up the packet again and flipped through the pages with care. It was the usual HOA nonsense, sections, subsections, bolded warnings. But the more I read, the more one detail stood out: no actual deed references. No mention of easements, no legal descriptions, nothing enforceable. Just vague language that sounded scary to people who didn't know better. That realization made me smirk in spite of the situation. They thought they could bully me into compliance with half-baked bylaws. But I wasn't some naive homeowner who didn't read contracts. I had spent weeks reviewing every inch of the closing documents. If they wanted a fight, they had picked the wrong opponent. Still, I needed to be absolutely certain before making my next move. So I walked over to the dining table where my folders sat in neat stacks. Each file was labeled Title Deed, Survey Map, HOA Correspondence. I pulled out the thick folder marked Title and Property Records. The paper smelled faintly of ink and old offices as I opened it. There it was, the golden ticket, the key to my peace of mind. The deed spelled it out in clear, undeniable terms. Full ownership of the lake and all adjoining structures. Not just the water, but the docks, shoreline, and maintenance rights. I read it twice, then a third time, just to savor the certainty. I sat back in the chair, feeling a strange mix of anger and relief. Anger, because those people thought they could intimidate me. Relief, because the law was on my side in black and white. They had no claim, no loophole, no legal ground to stand on. And yet something told me they wouldn't back down easily. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a new message alert. Ah! It was from an unknown number, but the tone was unmistakable. We expect you to remove the gate to the lake immediately." The audacity made me laugh out loud in the empty room. They really thought a text would scare me into submission. I typed back 2 simple words: "Show me proof." No threats, no long explanations, just a challenge. Seconds later, 3 dots. Appeared, then vanished. Then again, then gone. Whoever it was had no comeback ready. I dropped the phone on the table and shook my head. That night I couldn't shake the feeling they'd be back. People like that didn't quit. They doubled down. I imagined them in some living room, plotting their next move. The man with the concrete jaw slamming his fist on a table. The woman clutching her clipboard like it was a weapon. I decided to get ahead of them before things escalated. So I made copies of every important document I had. One set went into my fireproof safe, another in my cloud backup. The original deed stayed in its protective sleeve like a trophy. If they wanted a war, I was building my arsenal of facts. The next morning was quiet, too quiet, almost ominous. Sunlight sparkled on the lake, mocking me with its calm beauty. For a moment, I let myself believe maybe they'd backed off. Then a shadow moved across my driveway, and I froze mid-step. 3 figures appeared at my door like a recurring nightmare. The knock was louder this time, full-on pounding that rattled the glass. I opened the door slowly, already expecting the same trio from yesterday. Sure enough, there they stood, grim, determined, and self-important as ever. Only this time, the man with the concrete jaw had backup to more people. 5 HOA soldiers now lined my porch like they were storming Normandy. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. The leader ignored the pleasantry and thrust a paper in my face. "This is your official notice of non-compliance," he barked. "You're in violation of community rules regarding lake access." The paper shook in his hand like a weapon he barely knew how to use. I took it without a word, scanning the bold letters across the top. Notice of violation stared back at me in all caps, dramatic and hollow. Below that, a list of infractions that sounded more like fairy tales. Refusal to provide reasonable community access to shared lake property. I bit back a laugh, folding the paper neatly before meeting his eyes. "Interesting," I said, keeping my tone deliberately casual. "Now, which part of the deed gives you ownership of my lake?" The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. The woman with the clipboard shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. The leader clenched his jaw so hard I heard his teeth grind. "It's not about ownership," he snapped, his voice dripping with authority. "It's about responsibility and community guidelines you agreed to follow." I didn't agree. "2 imaginary rules," I replied, my patience thinning. I opened the folder I had prepared the night before and pulled out a sheet. "Here's the actual deed," I said, tapping the highlighted section. Their eyes darted to the paper, but none of them reached for it. "You see that line?" continued, my voice calm, almost amused now. "Full ownership of lake and all associated structures, including docks." I let the words hang in the air like a gavel striking a courtroom bench. The woman swallowed hard, the others stood frozen, speechless. Finally, the leader found his voice, though it cracked on the first word. "That doesn't change the fact that this lake has always been shared." I tilted my head and gave him a slow, deliberate smile. "Shared by permission," I corrected softly, "not by right." Their faces darkened like storm clouds before a summer downpour. "You can't just cut off access," another man spoke. Up suddenly. "People have boat slips out there. Can't take that away." I turned to him with a look that said I'd already thought of that. "They've had free access for years," I said, thanks to the previous owner. "But that courtesy ended the day I bought this property." The leader stepped closer now, his shadow stretching across my doorway. "If you do this," he said, voice low and menacing, "you'll regret it." "Is that a threat?" I asked, my smile sharpening like broken glass. "It's a warning," he hissed, his face inches from mine now. I didn't flinch. I just held his stare until he looked away first. Without another word, they turned and marched down my driveway. I watched them huddle by their SUVs, whispering like conspirators. One of them glanced back at me with a glare that could cut steel. I closed the door and locked it, though I knew locks meant nothing here. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Stood in the quiet after they left, the paper still in my hand. The notice felt flimsy now, nothing more than a bluff on cheap stock. But something told me those people weren't done, not by a long shot. People like that didn't back down. When proven wrong, they doubled down. And I knew the next move would come fast and hit harder. Sure enough, the email arrived within an hour of their retreat. The subject line screamed in capital letters, "Immediate action required." Inside was a wall of text citing fines, deadlines, and vague legal jargon. They demanded I remove my barriers to access within 72 hours. Failure to comply, they warned, would result in further enforcement measures. I almost laughed out loud at the melodrama dripping from every line. But then I remembered something my father once told me: never underestimate desperate people there. Dangerous when cornered. The HOA was backed into a corner now, claws out and teeth bared. So instead of laughing, I started planning my next move. First, I forwarded the email to my attorney with a short note. Is this even remotely enforceable? Within an hour, his reply landed in my inbox like a hammer on an anvil.
Oh.
You own it outright. They have zero legal standing here. The certainty in those words felt like armor sliding over my shoulders. I called him immediately to confirm what I already suspected. He didn't just confirm it. He doubled down with confidence. They're bluffing, he said flatly, his voice calm and measured. If they try to fine you, ignore it. If they sue, we'll crush them. Hearing that was like taking a deep breath after drowning. Still, I wasn't about to underestimate them. Not after that visit. They're not going to let this go, I told him quietly. No, they're not, he agreed. But the law is. On your side? Then he added something that sent a chill crawling up my spine. Which means they might try something outside the law. That thought lingered like smoke after a fire long into the night. I started checking the locks twice, then 3 times before bed. My security cameras became my new best friends, blinking in silence. Every creak of the floorboards made my pulse jump like a gunshot. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It felt like a siege. The next morning, retaliation hit harder than I expected. 5 bright orange envelopes were taped to my front door like trophies, each one stamped in red ink. Final notice. A violation? They didn't even bother with intermediate steps. They went nuclear. The combined fines inside totaled over $3,000. I snapped photos of every envelope and emailed them to my attorney. His response was immediate and almost bored. Ignore them. These fines are meaningless without legal authority. But boredom wasn't what I felt. I felt fury boiling in my chest. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about power and control. So I decided to hit back not with threats, but with proof. I drafted an email to the entire HOA board with one attachment: a scanned copy of my deed, the relevant section highlighted in yellow. I kept the body of the email short and sharp. Any further harassment will be met with legal action. Govern yourselves accordingly. Yes. The silence that followed was deafening for exactly 24 hours. Then came the next blow not to my inbox, but to my reputation. A neighbor stopped me on the driveway, her face full of pity. I heard you're cutting everyone off from the lake, she said softly. They're saying you're trying to ruin the community. So that was their new tactic. Turn the neighbors against me. By sunset, the whispers had grown into full-blown rumors. Someone posted in the neighborhood Facebook group calling me selfish. Another claimed I was monetizing access and charging for slips. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter now, perception did. I stared at my phone that night, scrolling through venomous comments. The HOA had weaponized social pressure, and it was working. I could feel eyes on me every time I stepped. Outside friendly waves had turned into stiff nods, or no greeting at all. They wanted to isolate me before the real fight began. That's when I decided it was time to bring out the big guns. I called my attorney again and laid it all out. The threats, the rumors, everything. He listened quietly, then said something that made me grin for the first time in days. Let's draft a CSA and dis letter, he said. And while we're at it, let's add a defamation claim for good measure. The letter went out that afternoon by certified mail. It was short, brutal, and dripping with legal teeth. cease harassment immediately or face litigation. Copies went to every board member and the HOA's management company. I imagined the looks on their faces when they opened those envelopes. But I didn't have long to enjoy the image because the war escalated again. 2 days later, I woke to a sound that made my stomach drop. Metal against wood, sharp and scraping in the dawn air. I threw on a jacket and bolted toward the lake in bare feet. What I saw stopped me cold on the frosted grass. One of the HOA members was at the dock with a wrench in hand. He froze when he saw me, eyes wide, caught in the act like a thief. "The hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my voice raw. He stammered something about safety and community maintenance, but I saw the loose bolts gleaming like broken promises at his feet. I took a step closer, fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. "You touch my property again, and you'll regret it," I growled. This time, it wasn't a warning, it was a promise carved from steel. He dropped the wrench and bolted up the hill like a scared rabbit. The sound of his retreating footsteps echoed like a drumbeat of war. I stood there for a long time, the cold biting through my skin. The lake shimmered. In the morning light, silent and accusing. This wasn't about a view or a dock anymore, it was about control. And the HOA wasn't just fighting, they were willing to sabotage. That meant the next move had to be mine, and it had to be big. I called my attorney again, my voice shaking with fury. "They're tampering with my property now," I said through. Clenched teeth, he didn't miss a beat. "Document everything. Photos, video, timestamps." "I'm way ahead of you," I said, already snapping pictures of the dock. "This isn't a dispute anymore, this is war." By that evening, my lawyer had filed the paperwork for an injunction. If granted, it would legally bar them from setting foot on my property. But he also warned me of something else, something darker. "They're going to come at you harder now," he said. "And if they can't win legally, they'll look for other ways." That night I barely slept, lying awake to the hum of the security cameras. Every rustle of the trees outside made my heart race like a drum. I pictured them out there in the shadows, plotting their next strike. Maybe it would be another wrench, at dawn or something worse. The game had changed, and I was the prize they refused to lose. The next morning, a letter slid under my door like a snake. No envelope, no stamp hand-delivered in the dead of night. I unfolded it slowly, the paper, crackling like dry leaves in a fire. The message was short, scrawled in black marker with shaking hands. "See you in court, if you make it that far." The note trembled in my hands, not from fear, but from rage. Each jagged letter looked carved out by desperation and venom. "If you make it that far." Those words slithered in my mind like snakes. This wasn't a bluff anymore. This was personal, and it was dangerous. I knew then that the HOA had crossed a line they couldn't return from. I slipped the letter into a plastic sleeve for evidence. My fingers steady, and I photographed it from every angle, timestamp burned into the file. My lawyer's voice echoed. In my head, document everything. They wanted a war? Fine. I'd build my case brick by brick. But deep down, I wondered what else they were willing to do. By morning, the neighborhood felt like enemy territory. Eyes peered from behind curtains. As I walked to my mailbox, whispers crawled through the air like smoke from an unseen fire. The HOA's smear campaign was working. The court of opinion was theirs. But the real courtroom, that was going to be mine. I called my attorney before breakfast, my voice sharp as glass. "They left a threat at my door," I told him flatly. He didn't sound surprised, only grim, like he'd expected this escalation. "Good," he said. "That strengthens our injunction and harassment claims." Dah! His calmness was a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. The injunction hearing was set for the following week. 7 days until I could legally bar them from my property. 7 days for them to push harder, hit lower, and fight dirtier. I stocked up on motion lights and reinforced the dock bolts myself. Every clang of the wrench echoed like a warning, shot across the water. That night, cameras caught movement near the tree line at 2:13 a.m. 2 figures, dark silhouettes, creeping toward the dock like shadows. My phone buzzed with the motion alert, yanking me out of sleep. By the time I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside, they were gone. But the muddy footprints on my dock told the story loud and clear. I emailed the footage to my lawyer and the local sheriff's department. The deputy came out the next day, boots crunching on gravel as he walked. He squinted at the screen, jaw tight, eyes cold as winter steel. "They're playing a dangerous game," he said in a low growl. Then he promised extra patrols, though. His tone carried doubt. The HOA didn't slow down, they doubled their attacks. Letters poured in daily, each one more absurd than the last. They fined me for improper dock maintenance and view obstruction. One even accused me of violating the community spirit. I laughed when I read that one, but the humor tasted bitter. By the third day, the rumors mutated into full-blown lies. Someone posted that I was building a private marina for profit. Another claimed I planned to drain the lake and sell the land. Each comment was nastier than the last, dripping with righteous fury. I could almost hear the HOA feeding them like breadcrumbs to wolves. I fought back with truth, posting screenshots of the deed and legal code. But reason doesn't go viral, drama does, and they knew it well. Every rebuttal I posted drowned in a flood of angry replies. Selfish, greedy, or destroying our community. The mob had picked its villain, and it wore my face. Still, I refused to cave not when the law was on my side. My lawyer drafted a formal lawsuit. Harassment, defamation, trespassing. Ow! The stack of paperwork sat on my desk like a coiled serpent ready to strike. We'd file the moment the judge granted the injunction. Until then, I had to hold my ground. Against the storm, Day 5 brought a new level of hella letter from their attorney. It was sleek, polished, and dripping with corporate venom. They threatened a countersuit for denying communal access rights. The letter ended with a line that burned into my skull. "We will pursue all legal and equitable remedies available." I read it twice, then called my lawyer with ice in my veins. "They've lawyered up," I said, voice flat, almost hollow. He chuckled a low, dangerous sound that made me smile despite myself. "Good," he said. "That means they're scared, and scared people make mistakes." His confidence was a blade cutting through the fog of doubt. That night I didn't sleep. I patrolled instead, flashlight slicing through darkness. Every shadow looked like an intruder, every rustle like a warning. Lake glimmered under the moon, silent and watchful as a witness. I kept my phone in one hand, ready to record, ready to call. Or wasn't coming, it was already here, and I was knee-deep in the trenches. The 6th day was quiet, too quiet. No letters, no emails, no knocks at the door. Just an eerie calm that felt like a breath before the scream. I knew better than to trust silence. It was a predator crouching in grass, and sure enough, the scream came at sunset. I was on the porch. When the roar of engines shattered the peace, 3 trucks rolled up, tires crunching gravel like bones underfoot. Doors slammed, and out stepped 6 HOA loyalists, faces hard as stone. They didn't knock this time, they marched straight toward the lake. I moved fast, intercepting them halfway down the hill. "Turn around," I said, voice low, every syllable. "Edged with steel. This is trespassing and you know it." The leader smirked, a cruel twist of lips that made my blood boil. "You can't stop us all," he sneered, his eyes glittering with defiance. "Move, or we move you." For a heartbeat, the world went silent, tension coiled like a viper. Then I spoke, slow and deliberate, letting each word drop like lead. "Take one more step," I said, "and the sheriff meets you in handcuffs." My phone was in my hand, camera rolling, call screen open. They froze not out of fear, but out of calculation. Finally, the leader spat on the ground and jerked his head toward the trucks. One by one, they turned and stalked back, boots pounding like war drums. The engines roared again, carrying them into the night like beasts retreating. But I knew they'd be back. They weren't done, not by a long shot. And neither was I. The next morning, the injunction was granted. The document landed in my inbox like a sword forged in fire. Effective immediately, they were banned from setting foot on my land. Violations carried fines, arrest, and legal ruin. I felt a surge of triumph, but also a flicker of dread. Because this wasn't Victory 8, it was escalation. I'd cornered them, and desperate animals bite hardest when trapped. My lawyer filed the harassment and defamation suits the same day. The courthouse became our battlefield and paper our weapons. But outside those walls, another war simmered in the dark. That night, the cameras caught something that turned my blood to ice, not figures this time, flames. A fire flickering at the edge of my property, licking up dry leaves. I grabbed the hose and sprinted, heart slamming like a drum. By the time I reached it, the fire was out, but the message was clear. Sent the footage to the sheriff, my hands trembling with fury. He promised an investigation, but his voice held no conviction. The HOA denied everything, of course they always did. But I knew, and they knew I knew, and that was enough. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. As I stood there, the lake behind me and smoke curling in the night, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about pride, power, control. And pride makes people reckless. Pride makes people dangerous. And now, the next move was mine. Or theirs. The courthouse loomed like a fortress carved from gray. Stone, its walls held centuries of whispers, secrets, and silent screams. I walked through its doors with my lawyer at my side, steady as a blade. The smell of polished wood and old paper filled the air, heavy as judgment. This was it, the battlefield they'd dragged me to. I was ready. We sat at the plaintiff's table, files stacked like loaded weapons. Across the aisle, the HOA gathered like vultures in tailored suits. Their lawyer was tall, sharp, and wore confidence like armor. But I saw it in their eyes, a flicker of fear they tried to smother, because facts were fire, and I'd come carrying torches. The judge entered, robe sweeping like a dark tide over the room. "All rise," the bailiff barked, voice booming. Like thunder in a canyon, we stood, the tension coiling like wire around every heart in that room. When the gavel fell, it sounded like the closing of a cell door. And then the first strike of this legal war began. Their lawyer spoke first, spinning lies like silk from a spider. He painted me as a tyrant, a hoarder of communal joy. He claimed I'd stolen heritage spaces from innocent families. Word dripped poison, carefully brewed for maximum sting. But poison only works if the victim swallows it tanned. I wouldn't. My lawyer rose, calm storm, voice slicing through their theatrics. He spoke of deeds of easements, or rather, the absence of any. He held up copies of the survey, notarized and stamped in ink. Each page was a bullet, and each bullet hit its mark. When he sat down, the HOA's smirk had cracked like thin ice. Then came the exhibit's video of trespassing, letters full of threats. The note from my door glared at them under the courtroom lights. Gasps rippled through the spectators as my lawyer read the words aloud. If you make it that far. The menace hung in the air like smoke. Their lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. With a cold stare, the HOA president took the stand, a brittle smile nailed to his face. He swore they'd acted in good faith, convinced the docs were communal. But when shown the deed, his confidence cracked like old paint. "Did you ever verify ownership?" my lawyer asked softly, like a scalpel. His silence screamed louder. Then any confession? I watched the jury's faces tighten with every answer he stumbled through. Their eyes flicked between the evidence and his unraveling composure. Truth was a slow tide rising, and it was washing him out to sea. He tried to cling to the wreckage of excuses, but they sank fast. And then my lawyer dropped the anchor that dragged him under. "Isn't it true," he said, voice quiet as a whisper, but heavy as stone, "that you authorized fines against my client after the injunction was filed?" The HOA president stammered, color draining from his face like ink and water. "Yes or no?" The silence stretched, sharp as glass between us all. Finally, he croaked, "Yes." The word sealed his fate like a tomb. By lunch, the courtroom buzzed like a hive struck by a stone. Porters circled outside their cameras, hungry for blood. I ate nothing. Hunger had been devoured by adrenaline long ago. My phone vibrated nonstop with messages, threats, support, questions. The war had gone public, and now the world was watching. Afternoon brought the HOA's desperate counterattack. They produced photos of kids fishing on the docks, playing by the water. Community tradition, their lawyer called it, his voice. Rich with false warmth? He looked at the jury like a preacher blessing his flock. But tradition doesn't rewrite deeds, and the law doesn't bow to nostalgia. Then came my turn to take the stand. I swore in, my hand steady, though my pulse was a drumbeat. Their lawyer came at me like a blade, questions sharp and twisting. "Isn't it true you refuse to compromise?" he asked, eyes gleaming. "No," I said. "I refuse to surrender my legal property." He tried to paint me as selfish, greedy, anti-community. I countered with calm truth, every answer a stone. "In my wall? Do you hate your neighbors?" he asked, a snake coiled behind the words. "I hate being threatened," I said, my voice cutting like frost. The jury's eyes. Softened truth has a gravity all its own. When the last word fell and I stepped down, I felt the weight lift slightly. But outside the courtroom, the battle raged hotter than ever. The HOA's followers spat venom online, branding me the enemy. My inbox flooded with insults, my voicemail with hate. It wasn't just a case. Anymore, it was a war of worlds. Day 2 of trial dawned with skies like bruises, storm clouds brewing. The courthouse steps glistened with rain, slick as oiled glass. Inside, tension curled like smoke around every breath. The judge's gavel cracked the air, summoning us back to battle. And then the twist came, sharp as a knife in the dark. There. Lawyer called a surprise witness, the previous owner of my home. Murmurs rippled like wind through dry leaves as he took the stand. My stomach coiled tight, questions clawing through my mind. What deal had they struck with him? What lies would he tell? But nothing could prepare me for the venom that spilled next. "I told him," the old man said, voice thin as paper, "that the docks were for everyone. That's how it's always been." My lawyer objected, but the words had already landed. Like a punch, U.S. attorney smiled like a wolf, teeth flashing in triumph. The jury leaned forward, the tide threatening to turn. My lawyer fought back, shredding the claim with facts and law. "Did you ever grant easement rights in writing?" he asked, steel in his voice. The old man hesitated, mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally he muttered, "No." The silence that followed was a bell tolling for the defense. By the time closing arguments rang out, the storm outside had broken. Rain lashed the courthouse windows like fists of the furious sky. My lawyer's words rolled like thunder, relentless and sure. "The law is clear," he said, "and so is the truth." The jury nodded like trees bowing to a rising wind. When the verdict came, the air froze in my lungs. "We find in favor of the plaintiff," the foreman said, voice firm. "Damages awarded, injunction permanent. HOA claims dismissed." The gavel fell like Judgment Day, and it was done, or so I thought. Outside, the world exploded into cameras, questions, and chaos. Reporters shoved mics in my face, their voices a storm of demands. "How does it feel to win? What will you do now?" I said nothing, just walked through the rain with my lawyer beside me, 'cause victory felt heavy and dangerous. That night I sat by the lake, verdict papers in my lap. The water shimmered under a bruised sky, silent, secretive. I should have felt triumph, but unease crawled under my skin. Because wars don't end with verdicts, they end with surrender. And the HOA hadn't surrendered. At midnight, my phone buzzed with a new message. No number, just words glowing on the dark screen. "Enjoy your win, it's your last." My fingers tightened on the phone, knuckles white as bone. The war wasn't over, it had only just changed shape.